Hi, I'm Jeff Insko. I'm from Groveland Township, Michigan, which is in southeast Michigan. It's a couple of hours east of Marshall. Everybody knows Marshall. I'll talk about Marshall a little, tiny bit. I want to thank Carl and the PS Trust and Glenn. I'm really honored to be here. I write and maintain the Line 6B Citizens blog. There it is, and actually there it is now after a spiffy new makeover we gave it last week. And I should say that this pipeline stuff is sort of new to us, and our involvement in it really started because our property is along the route of Enbridge's Line 6B crude oil pipeline, and everybody here knows that that's the same pipeline that ruptured near Marshall in 2010, spilling over 1 million gallons of oil into Talmadge Creek, which is a tributary of the Kalamazoo River. And many of you also probably know that Enbridge is currently replacing, at present anyway, about 75 miles or so of that 40-year-old pipeline, including a short stretch of it that runs through my backyard. So there's my backyard. My dog is in darkness. The garden in front and the trees in back. There's another picture that shows the garden. And this is my backyard as of a couple of weeks ago. And there it is just a couple of days ago. So, and I want to be clear from the start and say that I don't in any way oppose the replacement of Line 6B. In fact, I don't think I've ever met anybody in Michigan who opposes the replacement of Line 6B. Whatever concerns we've had about this pipeline project have always been about how it gets done, not whether it gets done. And you know, because my experience is limited to this pipeline and to Enbridge, I can't really speak to whether the difficulties that this project has had in Michigan are common, but I can say that the project has been in many ways quite contentious, and I know for certain that it's made a lot of people very unhappy. So in my time, I just want to talk a little bit about how we became active in all of this. We like to say that Enbridge made us into activists. And I want to talk a little bit about what we do at the blog and why. And I just hope that our story will prove in some ways instructive and useful for improving relations between pipeline companies and landowners, especially since the main point of my story is really a very simple one, and that is that it didn't have to be this way. So, at first, we trusted. The day that a right-of-way agent came to our door and told us that Enbridge was going to take down our beautiful trees and our garden that we'd labored for years to create, we were devastated. But we also understood that we bought a property that had an easement on it, and so despite our shock and our sadness, we had no intention of trying to fight or to stop the project or anything of that nature whatsoever. In fact, we were prepared to be good faith partners. And in fact, initially, we trusted our row agent completely when he told us repeatedly that Enbridge wanted to make us whole. It was interesting that Gabe Scott in a panel before had a quotation from Exxon about making us whole. It's a common phrase. Unfortunately, it quickly became clear that that wasn't going to happen. And I don't have time for details, and this really isn't about our personal situation anyway. Suffice it to say that, one, our idea of the value of a tree and a flower is very different from Enbridge's idea of the value of a tree and a flower. And two, the things that row agents say to landowners, in our experience, aren't always 100% reliable, I'll say. So our negotiations, they dragged on for months, and they were characterized mainly by long silences from Enbridge. They went from February to July, and we became increasingly frustrated and demoralized, all the more so once in July the NTSB report on the Marshall spill came out. We read every horrifying word of it. So at that point, we began to read and research more and talk to our neighbors and to other landowners. And one thing that we learned was that, you know, aside from a few other active landowners who had organized a couple of informational meetings, there was remarkably little public discussion about this project. It seemed, from our point of view, that almost nobody was talking about it. And so what we decided to do, as a way of helping our fellow landowners, was just to launch a kind of public awareness, a grassroots public awareness campaign. So we started to contact, for example, local, state, and federal officials and asked them to pay attention, to ask questions. We pestered local and national reporters in the hopes that they might help raise an awareness. And just to give you an idea of how little attention was being paid, a couple of quick illustrations of this. We wrote a letter to our state senator, Debbie Stabenow, and she wrote back thanking us for contacting her about the Keystone XL project. Another illustration, another illustration is that we oddly had more success contacting national news outlets than we did contacting local press. And partly because I think they were interested in the Stabenow story. And I should mention that Katie Bodenmiller here is my brilliant wife. But so more important than those two activities, we started to reach out to our neighbors. We stuffed flyers into the mailboxes of landowners along the pipeline route in our township. We launched the blog. And the original idea behind the blog was we just wanted to create a kind of clearinghouse of information, a way to help landowners connect with other landowners, to share their experiences, to share resources, to prepare people for negotiations, and just to try and alleviate some of the feelings of isolation and hopelessness that I think attend this kind of project from a landowner's point of view. So more than anything else, we just wanted to disseminate information, and we wanted to foster conversation. And really, we wanted to help other landowners. We did not want to make trouble for Enbridge. And so this attempt to foster conversation actually didn't exclude Enbridge. There's this sort of odd coincidence in the way that all this happened, that the very week that we signed our agreement, we weren't happy with the agreement, but we were tired and demoralized and beaten down. But that very week we were heading off on vacation, and our vacation is in Minnesota, and it turns out we drive up to the Upper Peninsula and we make a left turn to get to our vacation. I mentioned that little bit of geography because Superior, Wisconsin is on the way, and there are Enbridge corporate offices in Superior, Wisconsin. And it turned out that very week there was summer construction happening, and so there's a detour, and so instead of going around Superior, we had to drive through downtown Superior, and we're driving through downtown Superior, and we look out the window, and there are the Enbridge corporate offices. It was fate. So we turned the car around, we went around the block. This picture's from that day. We turned the car around, we parked out front. The dog was in the car, so my wife had to stay with the dog, and I went upstairs and asked if I could speak with someone at Enbridge. And I mean, here's the thing. I mean, at the time when I genuinely believed, and this was really the motivation. I didn't want to go there to rant and rave. That wasn't the motivation. That I genuinely believed that it was possible, maybe even likely, that the people up in Superior, for example, simply didn't know what actually goes on down in the trenches between row agents and landowners, for example. And I also believed, and I still do, that people at the corporate level assume, and why wouldn't they, that just because landowners have signed an agreement that that they're happy, that everything's gone, that things have gone amicably. But I think this is not necessarily true. And so I wanted to talk about these things. So I was able to speak with someone. She was an assistant to someone in land rights, and she seemed honestly concerned with the things that I narrated to her. And she seemed sympathetic, and she told me it would be taken care of. And I actually left that meeting feeling pretty good. But then no one followed up. And the conversation didn't really seem to yield any kind of result at all. It didn't go anywhere. So we followed up repeatedly. But we were brushed off. We were ignored. Now, it would have been one thing if Enbridge was just brushing us off. We're nobody. There are hundreds of landowners they have to deal with. But when we got back from vacation, we learned that Enbridge was also declining invitations to attend meetings with our township board, and that they were dismissing the legitimate concerns of other people, groups, and municipalities as well. And all the while, we were reading statements from their spokespersons in the press about how they deal fairly and openly and honestly with landowners, that they want to be good neighbors, and so forth. And so here's an example of what I mean. This was in a newspaper article about the 6B project. And I mean, what's interesting here is that on the one hand, they claim to be dealing openly and honestly with other landowners. On the other hand, they're calling people like me special interest groups, which I think is kind of a way of dismissing us, because everybody knows that special interest groups can't exactly be trusted. So the result was that all of this sort of caused a kind of evolution in what we do at the blog. That, at first we just wanted to provide as much information as possible to landowners and the interested public. But as we became increasingly alarmed at what seemed to us a kind of enormous gap between the things Enbridge was doing and the things that Enbridge was saying, we started to measure that, to measure their words against their actions. We began to test whether Enbridge was living up to its professed values. And there's an example of their stated values. So now at the blog, we actually devote a lot of time and energy to this, that, just kind of comparing Enbridge's public relations messages to its conduct and practices. Another way of putting that is that we do a lot of verifying, I guess. Unfortunately, however, the more that we have verified, the harder we found it to maintain trust. And I just am going to give 2 quick examples of this. There are lots more of them on the blog. So first, Enbridge is replacing line 6B, and I put replace in quotation marks because they're actually leaving the old pipe in place, and putting the new one right next to it. And so because of that, one of the most serious concerns that a lot of us have had is what's going to happen to that decommissioned pipe? And lots of us have asked that question lots of times. And when you ask that question, Enbridge always has the same answer, which is that they say we have no plans to do anything with it. And as if to assure us that our concerns are unwarranted and unnecessary because there are no plans to do anything with it. So when you follow up, though, and you ask, if they can guarantee they're not going to use it, they steadfastly refuse. And I mean, on one level, I totally understand that, right? Somebody, at one point they say never, and maybe that's true. But the thing is that it seems to landowners as if they want to have it both ways. They want to assure us that we don't have to worry about a pipe that's going to get used again. On the other hand, they won't tell us that it's not going to get used again. And so this question came up at a meeting that Enbridge held with the local municipality just a couple of months ago. And after, once again offering those same kinds of assurances, the township trustees asked them whether they had ever recommissioned or reactivated a pipe in the past. Really good question. And there were 4 Enbridge representatives there, and each one of them, the project manager, a lawyer, and 2 spokespersons, said that to the best of their knowledge, they don't know. They're not familiar with any instances of reactivation, but they'll look into it and get back to the trustees. So I went home from that meeting and I tried to verify that question. I checked. And it didn't take me very long to find at least 4 examples, I think maybe 3 or maybe 4, of reactivation, one of them on Enbridge's very own website. Now, it may very well be that those representatives, and I have no reason not to take them at their word, really didn't know about Portal Link. I have no idea. But what I do know is this, that it's been 2 full months since that meeting, and Enbridge still hasn't gotten back to that township with an answer that it took me about an hour to Google and get an answer to. So here's my second example. Lately, Enbridge has begun running a series of ads in local newspapers in our area, and they seem to be in response to some news articles from landowners' perspectives, but I'm not sure. And this is an ad that ran just a couple of weeks ago, and it's about land agents and negotiations and reaching agreements with landowners. And what it says at the end of the first paragraph there, it says, at the end of the day, you're not just landowners, you're our neighbors. So here's an ad that conveys the impression that row agents have a kind of personal stake in the 6B project and in landowner relations because, they're our neighbors and they're members of our community. They live among us. But the land agents that we dealt with were from Arkansas and Minnesota. So we looked into this as well, and from what we could determine, from what I've learned, there's only one row agent who's working on this project in our area who has any sorts of ties or connections in terms of residence to Michigan whatsoever. All the rest of them are from out of state. They're Kentucky, Tennessee, Arkansas, and so forth. And so what that means is, on one, they don't have any real skin in the game. On the other hand, the idea that row agents are our neighbors, from what I've been able to determine, is fiction. So why do these things matter? First, they matter, I think, simply because the truth matters. But they matter because they are exactly the kind of thing that erode trust. And they also matter because I believe they're at odds with Enbridge's own stated values of openness and honesty and truthfulness. It doesn't have to be this way. Here's the frustrating thing about all of this. here's the simple, uncomplicated reason that it didn't have to be this way. Enbridge knows exactly what to do to earn and keep the trust of landowners. I mean, hiring land agents, for example, who are our neighbors, I think that's a good idea. I think that would actually help. So they know how to cultivate mutually beneficial relationships with their host communities. They know exactly how, as their spokespersons say, it's in that ad also, to create win-win situations. On some level, it's not that difficult. What they need, all they have to do is do what they say, to live up to their own professed values and their self-image. And the thing that's interesting to me about this is that it's all there in their publicly issued material. So, for example, this is from their 2012 Corporate Social Responsibility Report. This paragraph, I won't read all of this. But when I do read it, I think this is right on the money. I mean, this is how you cultivate good, trusting relationships. I'm just not sure, as Anthony Swift pointed out earlier today, that the rhetoric always aligns with the reality. So quickly then, in conclusion, that our experience, as I said at the outset, is limited entirely to Enbridge. So I don't know how other companies treat landowners. It's one of the things I'm interested in learning from other people here, like Emily and Bonnie. But I suspect that much of what I said is actually broadly applicable. So I'll conclude with one example of why I think that. I spent a little time this week looking up the corporate values of other pipeline companies, and these are chosen arbitrarily. I'm not trying to pick on anybody. What I found was kind of striking. Now, I mean, it might very well be, likely, that certain values are simply universal. So in that regard, it's not surprising to find that these items restated in this way. I've underlined things that are in common. On the other hand, seeing them restated in this way might also lead one to believe that they're carefully crafted, maybe by the very same marketing experts. Because one thing that we've learned over the course of these 6, 8 months, whatever it's been, is that the more something gets repeated, something like "we want to be good neighbors," the more likely it is to be, a talking point or a slogan or a buzzword rather than a genuine guide to conduct. So in my view, the main challenge for pipeline companies in their relations with landowners comes down to recognizing and negotiating one seemingly obvious, self-evident fact. A self-evident fact that weirdly seems to be a problem, and that's this: that saying you treat people with respect is not the same as treating people with respect. That saying you value the truth is not the same as telling the truth. Saying you're a good neighbor is not the same as actually being a good neighbor. So, thank you.